أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام يا رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back to another program, our Soulful dialogue. We wish to have you all here today. Jummah Mubarak to you all. Inshallah, today's program is an important program. It discusses men in therapy, right? And one of the beauty of this discussion is that this topic is not really talked about, right? So what we want to do today is discuss and talk about what's the cause behind it, what's the reason behind it that we don't get many men come into therapy, right? It's kind of like the question that kind of most often we almost want to ponder, right? If it's us, if it's our family members, if it's our spouses, kids, it's like, how do we get our fathers into therapy? How do we get our brothers, our sisters into therapy? Because, as men, we know everything. So we really don't need to come. So inshallah, yeah, today's topic, it's going to be a very educational topic. And it's we're going to make it exciting. We're going to make it fun and very interactive. And for that, today, we've got a very special guest here today. Brother Naji Yussef Shtayyeh, who is a Palestinian-American, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and also a clinical counselor. He was born in Riverside, California, to Palestinian immigrants, and recently celebrating his 1-year anniversary with his wife. Well, congratulations to you and your wife. Great. Brother Naji is currently working at Cal State University as a mental health therapist, primarily serving men of color and students of the Sawana community, which is great because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, the clientele that he has and the men that he sees of different colors. And then I'm going to bring in, which also includes the Muslim community. And I'm also going to bring in, the men who we see through our clinic who come from the Muslim community, and maybe talk about similarities or differences and see if there is any differences or any similarities. So again, welcome to our program, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for inviting me into this space. This is truthfully my first Q&A I've ever done, so we're going to see how I perform, but I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully anything that we talk about or anything that I share can be helpful. But of course, if you have questions or concerns after our talk today, specifically about something that I said, I can hang out a little bit afterwards and see if I could clarify or if we could have a discussion, and if you prefer kind of the privacy of that.
Absolutely. And again, I think you're just being modest. Brother Naji does come to us with great credentials. He's just being modest about that because he has great experience in the field of mental health and how to deal with men. Now, the first question I wanted to ask you is why is it important to understand men in therapy, and why is it important to have them in therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. So men, like anybody else, do struggle with things, and that includes mental health related challenges. However, men don't typically go to therapy, or at least therapy isn't the first space that men look for when they're trying to get help with challenges, again, specifically mental health related. And men can really benefit from therapy. And there's a lot of reasons why men don't seek therapy. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about this in more detail, but generally the barriers tend to be things that they've learned about therapy or what they understand it means to be a man, and how that idea of being a man doesn't fit with seeking help in therapy. And unfortunately, when a man does not get the help that maybe he deserves and the help that might be able to work through some of these challenges, it does impact not just... Oh, other way? Oh, is it better? Okay, yeah, we can share. Hello.
It only works when I speak. So this is good for me, though.
Yeah, this is perfect. That's why we're all here, right? Just to hear you. Thank you.
I secretly pay our technician, so whenever I speak, bump up the audio. Whenever the guest speaks, lower it.
I can't wait to see the stream recording. I hope it's just a zoomed in camera to your face
Yeah,
the entire time.
I'm just joking on that.
Is that better? Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. So when men don't get the help that they so deserve, it doesn't just impact that person, but it impacts their partner, their loved ones, their family, and their community. So it's not just a problem of the individual, but it is a problem of the community. And we believe that if we get more men, not just into therapy, but just to be able to talk about things like mental health challenges, it's going to create an invitation for other men in the community to want to talk about these things and essentially take away the stigma, take away the things that make talking about mental health scary. And if we could kind of not just heal alone, but heal as a community, we're probably going to see a lot more healing done a lot quicker.
Now, would you say is it easy to engage men or is it difficult? Because one of the things that we see right in the community is we do see that it is a lot difficult to engage the brothers and the men. You know, in our community, like I said earlier, if we have a program, usually majority of the times, I would say 70 to 80% of the time, it's mainly women and children who attend, right? The men don't come to any programs that pertain to anything that has mental health involved, right? So how about you? Do you see a trend in that? Because we also see a trend in not getting a lot of men coming to therapy, you know, for like anxieties, depression, stressors. But once things become more serious, where there's a problem in the household and it starts to affect others, and things are starting to get out of their control or their grasp, then they'll go ahead and seek help. So how is it for you guys?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I suppose I should say like shukran. Thank you, men, for being in this space and women. But yeah, there's a lot of unique challenges that come with engaging men in therapy. I'd say that the two biggest ones tend to be like shame and stigma. A lot of men aren't really socialized or taught that they can talk about their feelings to other people, especially strangers that aren't maybe their immediate family. And to be able to open up your heart and be vulnerable to another person can be kind of scary and hard to do because men aren't often taught like how to talk about what they're struggling with. They might be really good at problem solving and figuring it out on their own, but when they encounter something where like you need support or support would really help you get over the hump, that's a lot different. And it's a different language to speak when you talk about your feelings. And it takes a lot of humility and courage to be able to get the help. The stigma part, though, is when no man talks about getting mental health, then everyone kind of suffers silently. And when no one talks about it, then no one feels comfortable to break through the norm being, no, we don't go get therapy. We don't go get the help. So those are usually the biggest challenges is just like the norm of not getting therapy, of just doing it on your own, and just the personal shame and the embarrassment that might be felt if you were to go reach out for help. So that's usually what I deal with. I will say because my position was made specifically at the university I work at to make therapy a lot easier for men to come and get. And I know one of the questions will be talking about like barriers and how to address it, but there is a lot of movement with getting men more contact with stuff like your mental health because there hasn't been much outreach. There hasn't been really much education about this, and it does start with a lot of the professionals who are experts, quote unquote, in mental health to be able to actually reach out to people who just aren't used to it, aren't comfortable with it, and to kind of make it safe and make it easier to get to and make it in a way that's kind of relevant to men. Because if we just talk about mental health like as I don't know, like intellectuals on our ivory like tower, no one's going to care. That's not going to fit for anybody. That's not accessible, and that's not helping anybody. The point of, you know, getting people into therapy, getting men into therapy is being able to find a way to meet them where they're at. And that's something that I think has been really hard for a lot of professionals to do. And now we're seeing a lot of movement there. I mean, for some time, but now I think that snowball's been getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I mean, compared to, I would say 10, 15 years ago, there's much more enrollments of men coming into therapy. That's something that we see as well. You said something very important earlier on. You said when men don't seek therapy, others suffer, right, in silence. What did you mean by that? Oh,
Yeah. So I know that like for a lot of the men that I see, and I think this is pretty common with other folks in the field, and I'm guessing this is something that you've experienced. Men don't come to therapy right away when they notice like, hey, something is off, something is wrong, I need to go get help. It tends to be that things are kind of falling apart, and it tends to be their loved ones that kind of notice things are off and kind of encourage or push them to go get help because the other stuff that the man might have tried to do isn't really working and isn't changing anything. And for men, when they experience mental health symptoms and they experience, distress, it usually comes in the form of like holding it in and bottling it up. And if you've ever gotten a bottle of like soda, something that's like already kind of pressurized and carbonated, you just keep on shaking that thing. It's going to build up the pressure until eventually the thing bursts. And that's kind of what happens with men typically, since we're not like taught how to talk about our emotions or like a healthy way to respond to them and kind of get them out, finding an outlet to let our emotions out. They tend to hold it in until it bursts, and bursting for men tends to look like anger. And often in therapy, I know we talk about anger being what we call a funnel emotion, which, long story short, that just means that the one emotion men typically know how to show because they've seen other men do it, because they're taught it's generally okay to do it, is anger. And when a man is really angry, it usually is going to lead to some kind of harm of himself or harm to his family, whether or not that's like direct or indirect. So that's, I guess, part of what I mean. If a man isn't holding it in and it blows up, he's finding other ways generally to kind of like soothe himself. We say like self-medicate. That usually comes in the form of an addiction, whether or not it's like using some kind of drug or alcohol or substance like that, or some other escape like gambling.
and what would you say some, again, going back to that question, like common barriers or challenges they face when coming to therapy, would you say?
Yeah. So I named earlier like the shame and the stigma. So as a man, and this isn't all men, of course, but I think this is generally what men tend to feel and what I've experienced. You're taught that to be a man means that you're tough, you're resilient, you're independent, you're self-reliant. Those aren't bad things, by the way. But if that is your only definition of what it means to be a man, and you're very rigid to it, that this thing is like stuck and molded, it's going to be really hard then to go ask for help. And that's something that is really kind of hard to make more flexible in a man who doesn't know that that's something that you can do and that it's okay to do. So the kind of messages that we hear growing up tend to make it harder to think that therapy is an option. And these things that we're taught growing up aren't bad necessarily. Like it's not bad to want to be strong or independent or self-reliant, but that can't work all the time, and it can't look just one way. Sometimes strength comes in a lot of different forms. We often say if you're able to be courageous enough to be vulnerable, that's you being strong, which might sound corny, but it does take a lot of strength to be able to go and ask for help. So that's a big thing. I also want to note that, and I know we talk about it a lot with like our clients. If you're learned that this is the way to be a man, that's not bad. That doesn't mean that your parents or your thought leaders or your religious leaders or sheikh doesn't mean that they were wrong to teach you that. And that usually comes from a really resilient, powerful place. And that usually comes from a place of wanting to survive or thrive in what they have known. So I know when I was growing up, to be strong was to be tough, to be resilient, to not show pain or fear or stuff like that. That's great to kind of survive really tough times. And in the context of what my dad has gone through, hey dad, he's here. He grew up differently, and he grew up with war around him, and there wasn't really a place to show emotions. That wasn't like a normal thing, nor was that going to be something that's really accessible that you could actually do. So those lessons are important and they are good to have, but we could have those lessons with other things that we could add to what it means to be a man. I don't know if I just rambled there. That answered any
No,
of
no,
the
no.
questions.
Those were great, great answers. Now, the question that I wanted to ask is, I think this is something very common. Do men have feelings now, right? Because I know we talked about strength and courage. What about feelings, right?
It's really tough. Yeah, I've been pondering this like every night.
Because that's a challenge we see when men come to therapy. It's very difficult to get them to talk about their feelings, right? And that's like, Brother Naji said, just because of the way they grew up and just the way they were raised, man is not to show their emotions. Why? Because it's associated with weakness, right? You're always supposed to stand firm, strong, and showing any form of emotions is not what is taught to us. And I know growing up in a household where my dad was a military guy, that was a no-no. That was a big no. If I showed any emotions, I had to run away because the results would have been very different. But yeah, just wanted to ask because it is very difficult on our end to get men to show their emotions. And usually in therapy, when they do come to us, it takes some time. It takes about, maybe anywhere between, 2 months or more till they slowly start to feel comfortable with us in the therapeutic process and then slowly talk about their emotions and feelings.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. So as much as we like to believe that we don't have emotions or we're like perfectly logical beings, the fact of the matter is we do have emotions the same as women. It's no different, but we're just generally raised differently. So we're like much better at using that logical part of our brain. Like that's been really like exercised the heck out of. So that thing is strong. The emotional part could use a little bit of growth. And that's something that we haven't spent as much time with. So we do have emotions, but we don't always know that we have emotions. For men, a lot of the times we don't notice the emotions right away. We actually notice like those physical sensations. So if you're feeling like really stressed or worried or scared or angry, you'll notice like maybe you have like sweating or that you like shake a bit or you have nausea. Those are the things that men tend to experience, which is why a lot of the men I work with, they tend to come from the emergency room first and they say, oh, I was having like a weird heartbeat and I felt like really sick and I don't understand what's going wrong. So I thought I was like dying. I went to the doctor. They said, no, you're having an anxiety attack. And it's like, okay. So that's kind of a new thing that we have to tackle and a new thing that we have to learn about. So yeah, men do have emotions. They just don't know about them always so much or don't have as much kind of, I want to say training in knowing the emotion and talking about it and talking with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also very selective when it comes to emotions and how men express their emotions. Because one way, very simply, I've always seen men express emotions is towards their children, right?
Oh.
Now imagine that, right? It's your own child. Anything that happens to your child, if they get hurt or if they fall, right away the father is either there to protect or is there to take care of their child, right? And that happens, physiologically, biologically, right? We have that. It's just that trying to figure out when can we also tap into our emotion and also cater to it. It's also important. It's also very healthy. Just like Brother Naji said, think of the soda bottle, right? If you keep shaking it, eventually it'll explode. So you don't want to get to that point because what will happen is usually most of the times if that occurs, most often with psychological effects, you start to develop physical sensations and symptoms. Brother Naji indicated that, right? You start having stomach aches, your heart palpitation goes faster, you start sweating. If you're sleeping, you start grinding your teeth, you start having nightmares. So those are all psychological effect that affects your body. And then eventually it makes it worse because then you either sleep too much or you don't sleep or too little. It affects your appetite. Either you eat too much to cope with challenges or you eat too little, right? You start feeling hopeless. So that in itself plays an effect as well. So please remember that. Now, another question I had for you, Brother Naji, is how can one best understand their mental health situations so they can seek therapy, right? So if I'm someone who is not aware of what's happening, what is the best way to go about it, basically?
Yeah. So I'd often say just like self-reflection, which just means kind of looking in the mirror and really trying to feel out what's happening. And I think it's really easy to go through life like moment by moment, just kind of reacting to things, responding to things, just like however you do intuitively, like just automatically. And we don't often take time to just like pause for a moment and really think about what's happening to our body and what's happening to our mind because we're really busy people. There's a lot of things that are stimulating, whether it's on your phone or with your family. And like, of course, there's a lot of geopolitical things happening in the world where our mind has a lot of places to wander. But we don't really spend time with ourselves to know what's happening there. And an analogy I might use is like, you know that you have a beard, but you maybe don't ever pay attention to it. Maybe you want to trim it. Maybe you want to manicure it. Maybe you want to condition it. You're probably going to want to look in the mirror to see what you're working with, what parts you want to like manage before you actually do it. Because if you just kind of do it all willy-nilly without actually knowing what's there, we don't know what we're going to end up with. You're just kind of like going blind. So you need to like actually pause and be intentionally thoughtful about what you're looking at, and just kind of think about that. That could be hard though, to like stop and think about what you're going through. And I'd say call in a lifeline. If you have a loved one that you do trust to reach out to, it might be helpful to get a third perspective, like a third person perspective, someone who could see you kind of outside of your own experience. Because we got blind spots. Like you can't know everything about yourself, because no one is so wise where they just know everything that's happening in every moment. And our loved ones might see things that we just don't always see. So if you're willing to reach out to a loved one and ask them what they're noticing about you, or, you know, if what their take is about something that you're struggling with, they might have a really good perspective and they might be able to see the full picture, because they're not living in your shoes and they don't have to always struggle with whatever you're struggling with.
Yeah, absolutely. Afterwards. So we'll finish the discussion and then we'll have a Q&A session. Yeah, we'll get to your question, inshallah. So that's a good point that you brought up, because one thing that I wanted to share is that, yeah, it's very, very important for us to self-reflect and understand, well, is something going on with me? Because usually we as human beings are aware, right, of if there's any discomfort or if there's anything that is out of the ordinary that happens to us. Now, the challenge is that we don't know if it's psychological or, you know, or it's actual physical symptoms. Because there's been times in cases where clients go to the ER most often, right? They constantly, every 2 weeks, every month, and then you'll see a doctor send them out. It's like, hey, you need to go and seek a psychologist because everything is psychological, right? You're stressed, and if you're stressed, most often, if you have anxiety, that's associated with having, you know, you get your stomach starts feeling a little jittery. So mostly, and what I've noticed is that a lot of the times, the brothers, they tend to, you know, rely on physical symptoms, even though it's psychological symptoms. Now, the question I had for you is, like, let's take a family member, right?
Mm-hmm.
People around you, like your wife, your daughter, you know, your brother, your parents. They come to you. What's the best way to approach someone who, I guess, is in denial, or is someone who is, you know, who you have a harder time reaching out to and explaining to them, like, hey, you might need help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because it can backfire, right? So that's the other thing.
Oh, totally. And you know, you can't really control how another person's going to react to what you want to tell them or what, you know, you want them to understand. But usually we'd say, like, maybe the way that we talk about it and the places that we bring it up in can help the person the man be like more receptive to hearing this thing, or whomever you're trying to talk to, and convey that you're concerned about it. If you were to go to therapy, especially like couples therapy, a lot of the work that's done is the communication work. How do we talk to each other? How do we understand each other? How do we listen to each other? These things that feel kind of basic, but honestly, like anybody, even like therapists who are married to each other, can struggle with it, because, you know, we're humans and sometimes we miss each other, and that's okay. The basic skill that we like to do, there's two of them. It's like I statements and active listening. I statements is pretty much, how do we talk from our own experience and not make it sound like we're blaming the person for something. If you could ever think of a time that you got into an argument with a loved one or a friend, if you remember pointing your finger and like saying like, I can't believe you did this, you're terrible for doing this, think about how they responded to it. Maybe they were like, oh, you're right, I should change. They probably didn't, though. They probably shut down, got really angry or upset or sad, and they're probably not really hearing you, but they're just feeling bad and they're having their own stuff come up. And we can't like stop them from having their own feelings or their own reaction to it, but we could kind of soften how we deliver it. So the I statement is just saying like, hey, I'm worried, start with like the I. I'm worried that this thing is kind of changing you, or that you like, I'm worried when I see you do this thing or that thing. So it's coming from a place of your own concern. You're kind of owning what you're seeing from them. And you're not saying you're doing this, that's wrong. I'm feeling this thing, or I'm kind of concerned when I see this thing. So it's harder to kind of attack. It won't put the man on the defensive, if you will. It's also helpful to kind of like
name what you're seeing that you're concerned about. So instead of saying like, I'm worried when you're a terrible person, that's not going to work. That's kind of like another way to say a blaming statement. You name like an objective thing, something you could see that they're doing that might be problematic. So I'm worried when I see that you're like drinking alcohol, or when you're gambling, or when you're punching a wall. Like these objective things that they can't exactly argue with, because it makes it harder to argue with. It's harder to kind of push back on someone just saying, you're doing this thing and this thing, and I'm concerned about it, as opposed to like, wow, you suck. That's awful. Don't do that. So how you deliver is important. Also, when you bring it up, it's really best if you could bring it up in a moment where it's not in front of a lot of people, especially around friends and family, that it's in a place that is just kind of private, confidential, and safe, because there might be a lot of emotions that kind of come with this, and we want to make sure that there's kind of time and space to be able to talk through it. I also want to highlight that there's not really a best or perfect time to bring up stuff that you're worried about, but there are some better times that you could bring things up, and that's usually when you actually have time to talk about it after you bring it up, again, hopefully in private.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and that's actually very important. It's how do you approach a loved one when you want to share an information, or let them know, well, hey, I have some concerns, and you explain those concerns, right? And then also tell them how it's affecting the relationship, or how it's affecting the person itself. And the way you approach it, it speaks volumes. Just like Brother Naji said, we just have to avoid using you, right? Because that usually the difference is when you say I, you're coming from a good place, right? Hey, I feel like this is what's happening, because that allows the other person to think and be considerate of what you should be doing. But usually, and most often, when somebody comes and says you need to do this, it becomes demanding now, right? And it puts and that's not something that you want to hear, right? It's like, wait, what's going on? Because when I do couples, there's times where the husband goes, hey, I'm not a child, why are you telling me I got to do, you do this, you do that. Or the opposite too. It's the opposite as well. So there's times where brothers do the same. I tell the sisters, you got to do this, you got to do this. And it's like, yo, we're not children, we're adults. So and one of the things that we do in therapy is we provide tools and techniques on how to have a different style of communication with your loved one, because your communication pattern, it's not that it's wrong, it's just that that's how you grew up to it. You either saw your parents communicate a certain way, it's just that's how you and your partner eventually learn to communicate. But there's other methods that can be used to better further your relationship and your communication skills with your either husband and wife. But I know the discussion is usually on the brothers and the men. Now, would you say is there anything that you see that's different in therapy when it comes to, like, I know you work with a lot of men and men of color. Does that make a difference, or no? Is it usually like the common, or usually a lot of the symptoms or diagnoses are pretty similar to what we're seeing here, like in the community?
Yeah, so there's sometimes like similarities, of course, but there are key differences that I think are missed. And I think that's also one of the things that for Muslim men, for Arab men, and for just men of color in general, it's one of those things that makes it hard to go to therapy when you don't have or don't see therapists or like helper people that look like you or that come from same backgrounds as you do, because it's hard to really want to go talk to someone who you don't think is going to understand you. Not to say that if you go try to find a therapist and it's not a Muslim man, that they won't be helpful. They certainly can, but like reasonably, it feels a lot easier to go to someone who we know has like some shared experiences, who we know kind of values the same stuff that we value. So with that said, because you're a man doesn't mean that you're going to have the same issues as every other man, because you're not just a man. You're a Muslim man, or you're a man of color, you're a black man, you're an Arab man. These different things that you have as an identity come with different experiences. So there's that term intersectionality, which just means different parts of you or these different identities intersect, and it makes for a unique experience, which is great. But it also means that there's sometimes unique challenges. If you're like a white Muslim man, you're going to probably have different challenges than a Black Muslim man. They're not going to be the same. Some of them might be the same, but certainly there's going to be some variations. And that means if your experience is different, you want that therapist to understand or want to explore that with you. You want someone to kind of understand that there's going to be differences and tailor make whatever support you need based on who you are and your own experiences. It's not like one therapy fits all. So I don't have like a specific diagnosis to throw out there, but I would say your experience, the context in which you live, like your background of your life, yeah, it's going to affect how you kind of the help that you need and the challenges that you've had to work through to get to that point where you go get help.
Yeah. So basically, the challenges are different, but
yeah,
but the psychological or the physical symptoms are pretty similar.
Yeah. Sorry if I beat around there.
Everybody goes through stress, right? So that's similar amongst all men, no matter if you're from the Muslim community, you know, you're from somebody from a different community. The symptoms are still the same.
Yeah, just like we all bleed, we do all stress, we all like feel sadness, we feel anger, we feel joy, hopefully. If not, please come talk to me later and we could see if we could figure that out. But yeah, even though the thing that caused that symptom might be different, we all have very shared experiences around what we feel. Did that answer yours? Did I also got it?
It
cool.
Did. Thank you. No, thank you for those answers, and these are very important answers. And then I'm going to ask a couple of more questions, and then we're going to get into Q&A, inshallah. Now, usually, a lot of times, folks are unaware of kind of the boundaries of how therapy works when it comes to, you know, confidentiality, right? And informed consent, confidentiality, confidentiality, most importantly. Just so we're aware of it, how does that work? So let's say if somebody wants to come and see you for therapy, like what would you say to them? Like, because I know most often, a lot of times, you know, when I get folks from the community, they're really scared that, well, if I come to you or if I go to someone and talk about my problems, it will be shared with others, right? And this is a concept and a factual reality that has taken its course like in different countries, right? There's no such thing as confidentiality in other countries. You know, there are, but it gets broken. But how would you explain that to someone and also make it comfortable for them so that way they can at least come to you in a trusting manner?
Yeah, totally. So confidentiality is essentially just an agreement that you and the professional you're meeting with make, where you both agree that anything that you do or say in that space is just going to remain in that space. There are exceptions. So if we're really worried about like your own safety or the safety of others because of something you're saying, then maybe we would have to, what we say, break confidentiality. Like we have to reach out to whatever agency we need to. I don't want to say that to like scare anyone. It's really more of like, if we're really worried about your safety, we want to make sure that you stay safe. And that's just an exception. Generally though, like anything you share is just private and between the therapist and you. And that secrecy isn't meant to be like devious or to keep secrets from your family, but rather to make sure that the space feels kind of safe and comfortable for you to talk about things. Because it's going to be hard to share something with a stranger if you don't think that they're going to hold that for you. And if you think they're going to tell other people about it. You know, if you're comfortable with telling other people about this thing, you probably wouldn't be in this space. You'd probably be able to go tell your family members or someone in your community. So confidentiality is just the kind of the agreement that we're going to keep things just between us in this space. And if something changes, we kind of talk about that as we go down the line. Our informed consent, by the way, the phrase you use is kind of like our full contract of like, I hate to make it sound so technical, but like our terms of agreement or terms and agreement of being in therapy. And that's just so you know what you're signing up for. And that just means like, hey, like it's voluntary. We can't force you to be here because we can't. We want you to be there. We want you to want to kind of do some work. But in the end of the day, if you don't want the help, we can't make you. And you're probably not going to get much from doing work in therapy if we're forcing you to do it. We could kind of help you figure out what that looks like, but we can't, you know, push you through this door of whatever journey lays ahead of you for that healing path. Yeah, I guess I have like a script of my informed consent, but it's like, I don't think everyone wants to hear that.
Yeah. It is, depending on who you go to, it can be a pretty lengthy and a long contract. So yeah, so that varies differently. Now, what I will do is I will go ahead and also open the floor for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask Brother Naji. So we'll start. I know I saw your hand up, so yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah.
So the question was asked, what are some of the common issues that men are facing today?
Yeah. So great question. Okay. That one might take more time to unpack, but let me do my best to like give a kind of condensed answer here. So the first part of the question though, like what are the common issues? In my experience, it tends to be issues related to anger, addiction, stress management, and relationship issues. And the reason why we see those is because usually a man doesn't go to therapy. Like I said earlier, the first time he notices something off, things kind of build up until they kind of explode out. Or a loved one kind of notices things are off, and they're the ones that kind of push their partner, the man, to go get therapy. So when that happens, that means that things have bubbled up to the point where the man has showed anger, because as we mentioned earlier, anger is one of those like exceptional emotions that men are comfortable sharing, generally speaking. And if they're not showing any emotion and they're just kind of bogging it down in there, usually they need something to help them do that. And that's when sometimes folks turn to like substances and their addiction. So that's why those two are kind of common. And the relationship stress is because, well, even though the man might not be able to admit that there's something off, the wife does, the partner does. They know that there's something off, and they're the ones who are kind of pushing them to do it. And stress management, I only threw that out there because as men, we might not know all of the feelings that are kind of like going through our head, and that we're experiencing, but we might know when we're stressed. We might know when we're feeling like we're about to lose it. So stress management tends to be just a man coming in looking for skills or techniques or strategies just to help them figure out how to manage it, how to like deal with that. And your second question was like, how do we deal with it? So not to sound too broad or fluffy, but the first way to deal with it is to begin to talk about it. Because if you're holding everything in, it's boiling in there and it's probably not getting figured out. I like to think of it as like a puzzle. I don't know if you've ever messed with puzzles, or at least you probably know about puzzles. If you just keep that puzzle in the box, you might know what it's supposed to look like, but you don't really know it yet, and you haven't pieced it together. So just having the puzzle there doesn't do you much good. You got to open the box and take out those pieces, start piecing them together, and going to therapy or having some other loved one or trusted person who you could go to for wisdom. I know in this context, we're talking about therapy. They can help you open the box with you and like put these pieces together. So talking about it helps get some of the stress out, get some of the emotions out, and it helps us figure out what we're actually looking at, and then finding something like a specific solution for your specific issue. So that's my broad answer. Anything more specific, I think we need to know more, about your situation. Is that okay?
Can you explain more about how to manage our stress?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that cool?
What is the best way?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
best way.
we can answer that, but then we have to also go to other questions as well, and then we can get back to you if you have more questions.
Okay. Perfect. So the best way is subjective. It's like it's going to be different for every person. The best way is the way that you will actually stick to, that you'll do consistently. So if we go back to that soda being pressurized, the goal of whatever you do for stress management is how do we open up the bottle before it blows up? How do we pour out some of the fluid, the liquid in it before it explodes? How do we notice when it's starting to get pressurized, when it's been shaking so it could stop shaking? And for everyone that looks a little bit different, I'm going to bring in another kind of like analogy here, but if you like to exercise, that's great, but everyone exercises differently. Some people like to play basketball. Some people like to actually do weightlifting or running. There's not one right way to exercise, but it's the one that you're going to do consistently and that you're going to do routinely. Because like with any stress management you do, you can't just do it once and you're done. It's not like you do one session of yoga or take a bath or take a boxing class once and like, okay, you're good. It's all out of your system. It's something that you need to do consistently so that you're always managing your stress. So for you, that could look like exercising, that could look like painting, that could look like doing puzzles, it could look like talking to a friend. It's your outlet. Where do you get your emotions out? Where do you get your stress out? And is what you're doing actually helping you? Because if you're saying like, well, I love to vape and do drugs, that might feel good for a moment, but that's not going to consistently help you. That's going to lead to more problems. I'm not putting that on you. That's just me taking an example. Was that an okay answer? Okay.
That was good. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to add on to it, you just have to make it, just like Brother Naji said, a routine, right? It has to be a way of life for you, and keep consistency, because that's what's going to help.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you're going to fall into the same cycle again.
Yeah. Sometimes I say stress management's like brushing your teeth. It's not always like fun stuff to do, but stuff you do every day routinely, hopefully, to manage like the stuff that's happening on your teeth, to kind of keep yourself from getting plaque buildup and gingivitis before it becomes a bigger issue. So you might not love whatever your stress management looks like, but if it feels like something that's actually helping you, then fantastic. And like you're here, you're praying. That can be stress management. This is an important place to be, as long as it feels like it's a good fit for you, as long as it feels like this is your community. So that's one thing. You already got something. How can we build on that? How can we add more things? So yeah, and I'm just kind of keep on talking.
No, it's very good. It's very good. We need this kind of dialogue. It just keep consistency, because you want to keep maintenance, right? Yeah, that's the best way to go about it. And also remember that it's going to take time. It's a process, right? If somebody is going to go to the gym, somebody goes to the gym and has a goal, like a vision of wanting to do something in 3 months, it's going to be very tough for you to accomplish a specific goal, or the way you want to look, because it actually usually takes more than 3 months for the body to change. So when you see the change, right, repetitiveness is good, right? You can hit the weight, you can do the exercise, but your body will eventually change within 6 months to a year. So understand the process and trust the process, even though if it doesn't make sense. When a professional tells you, like, just try out different methods, give it some time, right? Because I've had clients who come, and 2 sessions of therapy. Oh, this isn't working. This is making my situation worse. And I'm like, listen, number one, when you come to therapy, things get worse before they get better. Things get worse before they get better in anything, right? When you learn something new, it's going to be challenging. It's going to overwhelm the mind, the body. It's going to frustrate you, right? Like, for instance, I'm a big gym person. I enjoy the gym. So that there's times where when I go to the gym, when I try out a new workout, I am sore for 2-3 days, and I'm like, I don't want to go. I literally tell myself, I don't want to go. I'm going to go hit the bike today. I can't do this workout. This is because a lot of the time the folks, they get up on the rope, they climb a rope up and they come down. And I'm like, no, I'm good. But I keep trying. I keep trying and I keep going. So that's how it is. So when you implement something, just allow yourself time, and time will eventually catch up to your body and the mind. So that's the best way to go about it. Do we have any questions from the sisters' side, ladies? Yes, I'll come back to the brothers.
When you have actually one therapist giving your hand to other Muslim brothers, other than seeking advice, somebody will even share, not all shares, excuse me, not all of them are qualified to give solid advice. So what you guys doing is fabulous. Bigger scale. I have bad experience with these things, that's why I stayed with it.
No, absolutely.
I was told to kill my exit because we got divorced.
Sure.
And that's in the most.
Yeah. That's. I think that's the extreme on that end.
This is what's supposed to be the ritual advice. Anyway, what you guys doing is fabulous, and I think you guys keep expanding it a little more younger people here. Most of the people will be, that would be a great service to the Muslim community.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And one thing I would just add on to that, and what's happening, alhamdulillah, with our work today, and in today's world, we as a professionals, and it's if it's us, if it's our sheikhs and scholars, we always work together when it comes to any challenges in the community, right? So we refer clients, or clients get referred to us, but we always talk about cases, or at times if we know, okay, you know what, this is a religious question, that we have to refer them out to somebody who has the religious guidance. And then the other thing is that there's times where we get trained, right? Or, you know, we get guidance, or we try to learn the cultural aspect of, what it is, like, how to best approach the client. And then at the same time, there's trainings that is done for the community leaders and the sheikhs as well. It's not intensive where we talk about like diagnoses. It's morally in terms like, well, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to hurt myself, I want to kill myself, right away, how do you de-escalate that situation? And then after that, they will go ahead and refer them out to us. So there's always a collaboration in that. So there's always a collaboration in that end. But thank you for sharing your past experience. I know it wasn't the most fruitful one, but we're glad you're here today. And
Thanks.
Yes, brother Hussein.
So, the next is with respect to the people that you see, those that are practicing Muslims or non-Muslims, where we notice the difference between the two when it comes to terror. And also, my next question is in terms of the relationship, what are advice before it escalates to a different level?
And can you expand on that second part of your question?
Meaning that the communication should be to wife and husband, in terms of interactions, in terms of the stress and how to de-escalate dealing with each other, give each other space.
Yeah. Okay. So do you mind if I start with the first one? Yeah. So with, generally speaking, Muslim clients versus like non-Muslim clients, generally the Muslim clients come in with faith as like their biggest, would say, a coping skill, like the thing that really helps them get by. And we like to kind of integrate, like bring faith in. So some people think that like, oh, I'm going to just trust in Allah to give me everything I need to help me work through this. And therapy kind of is shunning him. And it's like, no. Now, this is where we kind of find a way to help you use your faith to find the strength within, the strength of God. Like that's all there. So we're actually trying to make sure that we're bringing your faith with your own journey. And with other people, maybe that's not as strong. That's not something that they need. Conversely, on the other side, I get a lot of folks who will come in because they're feeling challenged by their faith. They're feeling like they're doubting their faith. That tends to be because something in life is so hard to make sense of that they feel like, how can this happen? How can Allah like let this happen to me or my family? So it's kind of coming in to let them know that it's okay that this fear comes in. Like, we don't want you to hide it, but let's talk about it to find a way that you could kind of heal, work through the things that you have to let go of. And with faith, especially, what could be very powerful is that there is another purpose and another entity with Allah that you can kind of trust to handle the things that are out of your control. Because oftentimes people get into a lot of trouble and struggle a lot when they're trying to control the things that they just can't control. That's out of what they're able to manage. So they're able to put that to the side, trust in God, and then work on the things, focus on the things that they can control. And that's where we could find some strength. With other people, we could absolutely still find strength and we could still find things that work for them, but spirituality might not be one of them. And then for the second one, how to de-escalate or manage like stress. Yeah. So I would say a lot of it is communication. That's not everything, but that's a lot of the work, because no matter how much you love and care for each other, if you're not able to talk through your issues or even communicate how much you care for each other, things might get missed. Miscommunication can happen. People make assumptions, because they're filling in the blanks for what they don't already know. And that can lead to kind of mistakes in the relationship, honest mistakes. So communication is important. And the best way to start communication is knowing that the two of you have the same goal, that you love and care for each other, and that you're trying to figure out something together, that you're working as a team. Specific strategies, like how to talk to each other, that's going to probably take specific work that you and your wife or your partner or loved one will need to do together. Mentioned I statements before. I mean, that's maybe being too like technical right now, but just talking from a place of love, compassion, and the things that you're worried about and not blaming the other person is a good way to start. It's also normal to get into arguments or to be frustrated with your loved one, and that's okay. But when that comes up, how do we manage it? And you don't always have to figure it out in the moment. We can take a step away from each other, a few moments that we could agree to. We want both people to agree to it. Take a step back, relax, and then come back and talk. You're not going to be any good or effective if you're going to talk while you're angry. It's just, you're probably going to say things that you regret or do things that you regret. We want to calm down and feel like we're able to talk in a more relaxed way, come from a more calm, loving place, and not just like an angry or upset place. Hopefully that was okay advice. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, there were these. Sorry. I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I'm Naji.
What we can do is, if you know, your questions come back to you, we'll go to the brother.
What I'm concerned about is Muslim communities' cognitive dissonance. How they came to this country and pretended like they didn't see what was happening. And now it's all come full face because of Palestine.
Mhm.
But people are acting like Palestine is, I mean, this is a brand new issue. We've been suffering for 7 years. And the Muslim came to America, and the cognitive dissonance is pretending like you don't see it. So I'm wondering how much of our internal problems have something to do with the fact that this is not a hidden. The Muslims came here for economics. They didn't come here for Islam. The Muslims first came here, they didn't build mosques. Sisters didn't wear hijab. Muslims didn't wear beards. 30 years later, then they start saying, okay, maybe we should start practicing our deeds. So in the African American community, we're beginning to finally, after hundreds of years, talk about therapy. Finally. Because it was against the law for us to read for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we just started going to the university 50 years ago. When you talk about 50 years ago, you're talking about a small percentage. So now, when you come to America, we look normal. Because we're at the university, we're doing well, but we're not. We're suffering.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of stressors from our past. So today in America, African American marriage has declined by over 50% in the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't even understand it. But people are finally beginning to look therapy in the face and say, okay, you know, we've had post-traumatic slavery disorder.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the reasons why we're suffering. The Muslims are facing the same colonial disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So you all had to leave your countries to come to America, and you were hoping that America was the promised land. But no, America is the land of Pharaoh. So I'm wondering how much of our problems internally are because we made the wrong turn. And so what happened is cognitive dissonance, we're pretending like we didn't make the wrong turn, but we did. So now we're in a situation where we have Quran and Sunnah, and it doesn't validify what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to make sense of it. And so we need the ulama to step up and say, let's have sure, let's talk about, okay, maybe we made the wrong turn, but how do we rectify this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe a lot of the pains that we're suffering, you can trace them back to why we made Hijrah, why we left. You know, Muslim people don't just leave their lands for no reason. Everybody who left their land because America, England, France, Belgium has colonized those lands.
Mm-hmm.
So you come to America and you act like that. No, that didn't happen. But now, 60 years later, now the cat's off the bag, the elephant in the room is pink, and now we're having to deal with this. So as therapists, how do we deal with this as collectively as a community? Because even though some of these issues we're talking about like the individual, we're having collective issues as a
I love. Okay, yeah, I love what you brought up because our individual issues aren't usually just individual. We don't exist in a vacuum, and I think what you're describing is a term that we often use called like generational trauma. that there is this generational pain that you, your family, your ancestors had to carry and manage and survive through. And that's something that we have to inherit. And that's not a curse. It's just a reality. And you're naming everything that's happening like just this colonization. And we could talk about white supremacy and what all that means. But long story short, it just means that our family members, our ancestors, did their best to survive when other folks were coming in to conquer us, to take over us, to take our autonomy, to take our agency, to take away our faith, our religion, our family, our culture, a lot of things. There's a lot of loss when we talk about this generational trauma. And that's something that we always have to work with. And coming to this country, I will never fault my parents for coming, because I know they did what they thought they had to do to survive. There's strength there, and it sucks because, like you said, they didn't want to. It's not like they chose out of nowhere, like, let's go to America. That's great. That's what they thought was the opportunity. And I think to be able to name it is an amazing step, because before it'd be, oh, I feel this thing, but everyone's saying it's a me problem. It's like kind of gaslighty. It's like blaming you for things that are outside of your control. And the people that tend to do it are like maybe more white dominant culture folks, who may be Christian or non-religious or whatever, but it makes you feel like you're crazy. Like there's something wrong with you. There's something different about you, and it's your fault. And that's not the case. And when we're able to talk about it as a community, we could heal together, but also try to fight and advocate for changes together. Because it's not fair that we blame ourselves or our family members. And I think there's a lot of pushback now when we talk about colonization and impact that it had on the global South. And I mean, I know we don't have time to talk about this, but colorism is a thing. Obviously, racism is a thing. There's just a lot of things that are impacting us that we deserve to have honored and understood. Because if we're not able to name the pain, address it, and know that it's there, we can't treat it, and we can't just blame ourselves for having a scar that we never committed to ourselves. And that's not fair either. I don't know if that answered any of your question. I was really stoked by your question, though.
The cognitive dissonance is the issue that we're not dealing with, because if we're pretending like this stuff doesn't happen, then now it's going to affect generations to come.
Yeah.
In sociology, they call it the brain system, where 3 generations now, the children are not praying, they're becoming atheists, they don't speak your language anymore. So there's more issues than just coming to a place. You're dealing with homosexuality, gender roles in the school system. And 95% of our children are going to secular schools. And so we're not dealing with that, but we can afford the houses and the cars and all that, but we can't afford to put our children in schools. And the Jews, when they came to America, they never put their children in secular schools, and they're running circles around us. So they don't have the manpower, they don't have the money that we have, but they have something else.
So what I'll say is, when we're dealing with, say, like this generational trauma, which for me, I'm just a blanket say, just a lot of loss and disconnection. The cognitive distance you're talking about for me is like a survival mechanism. Like that's a lot of pain to hold on to. So how do you deal with it? Well, sometimes it's best to pretend like it doesn't exist, so you can just survive. So I think that we're able to talk about it, name it, and say like, hey, this thing actually happened. Like this is a problem. This was a problem and still is a way for us to actually process the loss, to be able to grieve it, and then we could heal from it and reconnect, reclaim what has maybe been lost. So there's no simple solution to what you're sharing about like this disconnect with what you think we had or what we could have been and what we don't have now. It's just, let's name it, let's talk about it, let's heal together. And if we have that conversation out loud, then I think that change will happen. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
I want to share one thing. Yeah. Actually, like really bringing men to therapy is really a big issue. It's become really like an obstacle to solve a lot of problems between among families. I think there is part of it is Islamic. You can look at it from Islamic perspective, cultural perspective as well, and because like what I realized, according to the people I see at the masjid, people who raised here in America are much easier to bring them or advise them, tell them go to therapy.
and they, accept this. People coming from overseas, like they migrated from Arab countries, let's say other Islamic countries, it's very difficult for them. I can, they're watching come and talk, but the man is totally refusing to come. He feels like it impact on his masculinity or like weakness. And there's also misunderstanding from Islamic perspective, like women, they have to bear the anger of husband, and his anger is always justified. And if he shout, there always comes to it, like the women have to be patient, and they don't address like yelling and shouting and hitting the wall is something against the even Islamic instructions. So we have this like culture like that. Sometimes I face it, but you can't bring the husband or you can't reach out to him because, and he's actually probably the main cause of that this house is collapsing. But he feels like he's immune from.
No, absolutely. That's thank you for sharing that. And again, that's a longer conversation, to address both. To have, I think we can do that in different programs. I know Salah is about to start, but to answer that question, just to add on to it, just what the Sheikh indicated as well. We have to understand that coming from a different country, we have to look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? Survival of the fittest. Usually, it's a pyramid. So the higher the pyramid goes, the more advanced the society gets. So usually, you have the basic needs, right? A person needs to be able to sleep, eat, drink water. Slowly, safety is involved. And then later on, as society gets more developed and has, individual has, the check boxes already checked, then slowly that allows them to now talk about their feelings and emotions and like, wait, it allows them to think and allows them to be able to, discuss ideas and be like, wait, like just like you, brother, when you indicated what's going on, why is it that everyone is starting to be more aware of what's happening now in society? I think it's again with over the years, one thing that I've noticed is that the community is also creating a shift, right? Before you come to America thinking that this is going to be a temporary, like a. So we'll end the program, inshallah. So thank you. If you have any questions, please come to Brother Naji. Have a great rest of your night. Jazakallahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.